Centrists and moderates in the US, the two terms are pretty much interchangeable, are people and politicians who are not entirely satisfied with the political programs of either.
I don't know if in US politics, nothing he said in this video so far has been really wrong. I don't know if I agree that, I don't know, is centrist a term that's used outside of like the internet? I definitely hear moderates and I definitely hear independents, but I don't know if I hear people say centrist. That sounds like that sounds more like an internet kind of like YouTuber term. Like I'm trying to think like Fox News, CNN, politicians. I feel like I don't usually hear the term centrist. I feel like I always hear moderates and I always hear independents. But maybe there's something I've missed there. I don't know.
Major political party. Unlike people who reject both parties.
Centrist is used in political party names in Europe. Yeah, maybe in Europe. Something that's really interesting. Oh, I've started using this program called Zotero to save articles, but I don't think I was using it back then. It was either a 538 article or it might have been a Noah. Oh, I've heard centrist Dems. I've heard that before. Well, maybe have I? I'm not sure. There is an article on It had to do with basically the idea is there is no centrist in America. There aren't really centrists and there aren't really moderates. But instead, what happens is we tend to call people moderates or centrists when they have a variety of positions that aren't really neatly filed into like the Republican or the Democratic Party. That's what actually happens. That I think it's incredibly rare to find somebody who's like in the middle on abortion and gun rights and big versus small government. Like that's actually a really difficult thing to find. Oh, that 538 article, that might be it. The moderate middle is a myth. Instead, what happens is you actually have a collection of people who like, these are all people that are super pro-life. They're super pro-choice. I think people should have abortions, but they're also like really big in guns. They really like guns. So these people will be called moderates or centrists, but they don't actually have moderate or centrist opinions. They just have a collection of things that they agree with on the left and a collection of things they agree with on the right, basically. Yeah. I feel like that's an important distinction to have because sometimes people use the term centrist, like this guy did in the beginning of his video. We're like, oh, we need to compromise on civil rights. I don't think that's really what a moderate is. A moderate is just somebody that doesn't fully agree with one political party. They have like things that they agree with both parties about.
From the opposite ends of the spectrum, moderate politicians, moderates in the US, the two terms are pretty much understand what's going on here. Centrists and moderates in the US, the two terms are pretty much interchangeable, are people and politicians who are not entirely satisfied with the political programs of either major political party. Unlike people who reject both parties from the opposite ends of the spectrum, moderates are most at home in the supposed bipartisan middle. They usually like saying things like, "We're neither left nor right." We'll get to that sentence in a minute. But first, we might want to understand centrists a little better. If we are to assume the definition of left and right as historically transcendent terms about the stance one has towards present society and values like egalitarianism, being a centrist doesn't really make sense. Over time, movements that start out on the left, like liberalism...
Okay, so he's making basically the big mistake that I just said in the beginning of the video. So people assume that centrist means that you agree with no positions on the left or right, but rather you want a moderated position between everything. That's not true, though. Here's an example of what might be like, this person might be considered like a moderate, right? You might have a coal worker that lives in West Virginia. Sorry, I was thinking I meant to say it, right? You might have like a coal worker that lives in West Virginia, and this guy might actually be like, he might be pro-gun, and he might be anti-abortion. But this guy's a coal worker. He's a union guy. He's also like really big in favor of like worker rights, and he doesn't like the fact that Republicans constantly try to like fuck over unions and shit. So even though he's conservative on some social issues, this guy might come out and vote Democrat. I believe this is what blue dog Democrats were like way back in the day, right? You might get a guy that's like socially conservative in a lot of positions, but he's left leaning when it comes to some economic things, and that's enough for him to vote Democrat. So this idea of like that guy's a moderate, meaning he's in the middle of everything. That's not true. That's not what moderates are. Moderates aren't people that are in the middle of everything. They feel strongly about things, but those things just come from both the left and right political parties in the United States. Oh yeah, as well as the Reagan Republicans who were from Detroit, sure.
Republicanism, or even parliamentary monarchy, become solidly right-wing movements without ever changing their ideology because they replace the old right and become contested by the new, more radical left. In such a position, centrism becomes nothing more than a conservative ideology. Its prime directive is resistance to change.
Wait, this is a really, okay, fuck. I didn't initially disagree with his like changing versus keeping the same, but like, if that's true, doesn't that mean everything becomes conservatism eventually? Like, what if we reached the perfect egalitarian society and then we didn't want to change it anymore because it was perfectly egalitarian? Did we just become conservatives? Isn't that kind of a weird way to look at it? Or because we don't want to change anything now, we want to conserve it? Okay.
And as a result, it's not, as they claim, neither left nor right, it's just right-wing. It might have been on the left in yesterday's society, but now that the goals of the old left are the established order and have become the new conservative right, preserving present society with only incremental and moderate reform, which is what centrists believe in, becomes a profoundly conservative worldview. And it makes sense that this is where moderacy settles, because it has to compromise between two completely opposing ideas: changing society in a new way or keeping it the same. Think about classic centrist statements like, "We just need a mix."
Fuck, now I feel like I want to fight on this definition a little bit more. Like, changing society in a new way versus keeping it the same. Like, couldn't you argue that both sides want to do different things for both things? That was vague. But like, when it comes to Social Security, that's something that we want to conserve, right? Most people are in favor of Social Security. But Republicans trying to replace Social Security with private insurance, wouldn't that make them progressive under that definition? They're trying to progressively change it into something new. But liberals on the left, or socialists on the left or whatever, they're conservatives. They're trying to conserve Social Security as the old order, right? Or, Republicans that are trying to destroy unions, like, oh, well, we want to move into like where everything is, all open shops, anybody, right to work, all of that. That's like a newer way to view employment. No unions at all. Like, well, that's new. That's progressive. But liberals or lefties they're very conservative. They want to go back to like old like union structures. Like that's a pretty conservative. You're trying to conserve with. That's kind of ordinarily when someone's like, oh, conservatives want to conserve and progressives want to change, like, okay, whatever, I guess. But if we're going to be really strict on this definition, now we're going to start to use it in arguments. I don't know if that really works that well,
Or keeping it the same. Think about classic centrist statements like, "We just need a mix of socialism and capitalism." An idea that makes absolutely zero sense when you understand the two ideologies and that their base disagreement about the ownership of the means of production makes them fundamentally incompatible. Okay, this all might seem a little confusing. Let's get away from the theory for a second and look at something concrete, like the Biden brand of centrism.
It's funny he'll say that, but there's a whole brand of socialists called market socialists that is also inherently contradictory, because a socialist should want to change both the means of production and the mode of production, not producing things in the commodity form. You don't want to produce things for a profit. You want to produce things that are socially necessary and good. So a market socialist is failing half of that. So market socialists are a mix of capitalism and socialism in a way that's both contradictory, but it also works because people say it does. But whatever. I don't know. All right, bye.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.